She hadn't meant to speak to the vampire king's mute son. Certainly not in front of half the palace. But when Maya's hands moved on instinct, silent shapes, she hadn't formed since her cousin died, the entire courtyard went still. What she didn't know was that she was the first person besides his tutor who had ever spoken the prince's language. And the lonely king, watching from the shadows, would move the palace itself, stone by stone, before letting her disappear again. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and let us know where you are watching us from in the comment below. Finally, make us a promise to share this video with your loved ones if you enjoy the story. Let's get started. Rain clung to the marble like cold breath. Duskmire Palace had a way of swallowing sound, especially on training afternoons when the noble children sparred in the courtyard and the air hummed with steel and spoiled laughter. Maya kept her head down as she crossed the stones, careful not to slip. She carried a stack of linen towels, fresh, still warm from the laundry fires, and tried not to notice the way the nobles' eyes slid past her like she was a shadow they preferred not to acknowledge. 3 years in the palace, and she still wasn't used to it. She had grown up in these halls, slipping behind her father's mop bucket, doing her arithmetic in broom closets while he polished chandeliers until his hands cracked. The palace glittered with chandeliers and gilded banisters, but all Maya ever smelled was soap, damp stone, and the iron tang of spilled training blood she scrubbed from the floor before sunrise. She had learned silence early, and how heavy it could be. A shout cut across the courtyard, children calling each other names, boasting about whose family would win the king's favor this year. Maya didn't look up. She didn't have to. She already knew who sat alone at the stone bench beneath the dripping oak tree. The boy in white. Prince Elena Salvatore, mute heir to the vampire throne. His pale hair shimmered in the rain like spun frost, and his ceremonial suit looked too bright against the dreary courtyard. While the other children dueled and bickered, he sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, eyes lowered to the wet stone. No one spoke to him. No one asked if he wanted to play. Some children avoided him entirely, superstition or cruelty. Maya couldn't tell. She paused mid-step, towels clutched tight. Something tugged in her chest, an ache like remembering someone she'd once loved. He looked so small, so breakable, so alone. Just like her cousin had looked. Right before. "Maya," a noble girl snapped. "Watch where you're walking. Honestly, you people should know your place." But Maya didn't hear the rest. Because the prince had lifted his head. His eyes silver blue, like a winter dawn locked with hers. Surprised, wary, bright in a way that made her heartbeat stumble. The rain thickened. The other children stared at her now, whispering behind their gloves. A janitor's kid wasn't meant to come within arm's length of royalty. But Maya's feet were already moving, crossing the courtyard as if something had reached out and pulled her forward. Her boots splashed through shallow puddles. When she reached him, the others backed away as though she carried a curse. Maya set the towels down on the bench and knelt so she wasn't towering over him. The prince's breathing hitched, barely noticeable. But she saw it, the tiny shift, the guarded tension of someone who expected pain and flinched at kindness. "Are you?" Maya whispered, then hesitated. Words felt too loud for him. So her hands moved instead. Shapes she hadn't made since she was 9 years old, when she'd used them to tell her cousin stories before sickness stole his voice forever. Simple signs, soft, gentle. "Are you okay?" The courtyard froze. The prince's eyes widened. His shoulders dropped a fraction, fear uncoiling like a breath held too long. And then slowly, like a flower testing sunlight, his own hands rose. He signed back. "Why can you speak like me?" Gasps tore through the courtyard. Children ran for guards. Servants gaped. A noble boy whispered. "He answered." He answered her. Maya's stomach dropped. She had broken an unspoken rule. An iron weight settled in the air, and she didn't need to turn to know who had arrived. King Elena Gilbert stood beneath the archway, rain streaking down her crimson coat. She was a tall, formidable shape carved from shadow and moonlight. Her braided hair shimmered like a silver chain. Her eyes, sharp as twin daggers, locked instantly on her son. And then on Maya. The courtyard bowed. Even the children scrambled into clumsy curtsies. Only Maya remained frozen, kneeling in the rain before the mute prince. The king walked forward. Every step was deliberate, measured, the kind that made the air colder around her. The prince stiffened, hands retreating into his lap. His throat bobbed. Maya saw something in his eyes, terror without sound. Terror that had lived there for years. The king stopped 3 paces away. "How?" she asked softly. "Did you speak with my son?" Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made Maya's lungs seize. I didn't speak," Maya stammered. "I signed. My cousin, he couldn't hear or talk. I learned, so he wouldn't be alone." The king's expression did not change. But something small and sharp passed through her eyes at the word alone. A whisper rippled through the adults. A human child speaking the royal language. Unthinkable. "It isn't allowed." The king silenced them with one slight lift of her hand. She studied Maya for a long, breathless moment. Maya felt stripped bare under that gaze, every insecurity, every scar of poverty and namelessness laid out like offerings at the king's feet. Then, against every expectation, the king extended her hand. "Come," she said. "You will accompany us." The courtyard erupted. "Maya," one servant gasped. "Is she being taken to the dungeons?" "No, look, the prince." Prince Elena's eyes were shining. Not with fear, but with something Maya couldn't name. Relief? Hope? Awe? She was escorted through the courtyard gates and up the marble steps toward the east wing, the royal wing, her clothes dripping rainwater, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't dare speak. She didn't dare breathe. Behind her, hidden from the guard's eyes, Prince Elena lifted one small hand to his chest and signed a single word meant only for her. "Thank you." Her world tilted, and Duskmire Palace would never be silent again. The palace swallowed her whole. Maya followed the guards through hallways she had only ever scrubbed, never walked with permission. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves and left a trail behind her like a ghost refusing to let go. Every torch she passed flickered as though trying to warn her back. They climbed staircases that curved like ivory spines, and past arches carved with ancient glyphs too delicate for janitors to touch. Moonlight spilled across the marble floors in pale ribbons, turning everything silver, beautiful, yes, but cold in a way that scraped against her bones. She did not know where they were taking her. She only knew who waited at the end. Prince Elena Salvatore, the boy who had thanked her with trembling hands. By the time they reached the east wing, her breath had thinned to threads. A steward in deep burgundy robes stepped forward to greet them. His hair was slicked back so tightly it pulled at his temples, and the spectacles perched on his narrow nose looked like they might shatter if someone breathed too loudly. "Miss Maya," he said without a hint of warmth, "the king has appointed you as His Highness's companion. You will be stationed here." Companion. The word landed heavy in her stomach. She bowed awkwardly, unsure how a janitor's daughter was supposed to accept a title usually reserved for noble-born protégés. When she straightened, the steward was already turning on his heel. "Follow me," he said. She did. The east wing was nothing like the parts of the palace she'd known. It was quieter, too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt intentional, woven into the walls by centuries of whispered lessons. The hallway opened into the prince's private living quarters. Maya stopped short. It was breathtaking. A moonlit indoor garden stretched across the room, vines curling along stone columns like green lightning frozen mid-strike. Lanterns hung in clusters from the ceiling, reflecting off a glass pool that rippled faintly with every heartbeat. The air smelled like peppermint and old parchment. To the left stood a small library alcove, its shelves lined with books so old the spines had softened into velvet. A cluster of tiny carved animals, dragons, wolves, winged horses sat on a low table beside a cushioned reading chair. Their wooden eyes gleamed with childish hope. The prince stood near the window. He wasn't wearing ceremonial white anymore, just soft gray nightclothes, his pale hair falling loose around his face. He looked smaller in the warm lamplight, like a child pretending to be a statue because statues couldn't be hurt. He turned when the steward announced Maya. His eyes widened, brightening like struck silver. Maya dipped her head. "Your Highness." He raised his hands, hesitant. "Hello." Maya's throat tightened. She signed back. "Hello." For a moment, neither moved. Then he took a step closer. Another. Until he was only inches away, blinking up at her with a shyness that didn't quite hide the spark she'd seen earlier in the courtyard. He signed slowly, each movement careful. "You really came." Maya nodded. The king told me to. The prince's brows pulled together. Did you want to come? Her breath caught. No noble child had ever asked her what she wanted. Yes, she whispered. Then she signed it too, so he would see the truth in her hands. Yes, I wanted to. The prince smiled small, tight at the edges, but real. The steward cleared his throat. Miss Maya, your duties begin at dawn. The prince's lessons resume tomorrow morning. A tutor will arrive shortly. You are to remain in this wing unless summoned. Then he excused himself, vanishing with the click of polished shoes. When he was gone, the prince relaxed, slightly, and Maya realized they were alone. A silence unfurled between them. Not heavy, just fragile. The prince gestured toward a low table in the center of the garden, where an unfinished puzzle lay scattered like snowflakes. He signed, "Do you want to play?" Maya hesitated. "I don't know the rules," she said softly. The prince's hands fluttered. "Neither do I just make them up." She laughed under her breath. Something in the sound startled him, his eyes widened, cheeks flushing with shy pride. They sat together at the table. What followed was awkward. At first, his signs were fast, fragmented, sometimes crooked. Hers were slower, uncertain, rusty after years without practice. Their timing collided often. Maya bumped his elbow more than once. The prince would flinch each time, only to apologize with frantic hands. But then a small carved dragon toppled off the table and slid beneath the cushions. The prince gasped, eyes following it as though the world had ended. Maya reached under the seat and retrieved it with a triumphant flourish. And she signed a single word. Found. The prince froze, then burst into a soundless laugh, shoulders shaking, face brightening so fiercely it startled her. He reached out and touched the back of her hand, tentative and warm. "Teach me that sign again," he begged. She did. Again and again, until he learned it perfectly, mimicking her movements with contagious excitement. It was the first time she'd seen him express joy without fear. She hadn't noticed the tutor arrive. A tall man with parchment-colored hair and a long coat trimmed in silver stood in the doorway, arms folded. His expression hovered somewhere between suspicion and relief. He cleared his throat. The prince jolted upright, hands retreating to his lap. "It is late, Your Highness," the tutor said gently. "Lessons will begin in the morning." Prince Elena's shoulders tightened. He signed slowly. "I know." The tutor nodded once, his gaze flicking to Maya. "You must be the king's new selection." Maya stood too quickly, nearly knocking over the puzzle pieces. Yes, sir." "You understand the responsibility placed upon you?" he asked. She wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. The tutor studied her for a moment longer. Then his expression softened. "If you can make him laugh," he murmured, "you've already accomplished more than any of us." He left with a bow of his head, but not before Maya noticed the worry lingering in his eyes. The palace came alive at night in odd, whispering ways. Servants hurried past with nervous glances. A pair of guards murmured sharply when they saw Maya in the east wing. Their eyes narrowed with something between resentment and fear. Word was spreading too fast. She caught stray fragments. "A human girl?" The prince responded to her. The king must be mad. In the kitchens the next morning, the housekeeper, a plump woman with a soft voice, nearly dropped a tray when she saw Maya. "Oh, child. You?" she whispered. "In the east wing?" Maya swallowed. "Apparently." The woman clucked her tongue. "Stay careful. People don't like change, especially here." Even her father appeared at the corridor's far end, mop in hand. His eyes widened when he saw her new post, but pride flickered behind the fear. "I always knew you'd go farther than these stone floors," he murmured. "Just don't forget to watch your back." Maya hugged him tightly. She didn't say that she was terrified. The day unfolded in gentle waves. Maya helped the prince read, tracing letters with his fingertip when he signed too quickly. She watched him practice silent arithmetic, his brow folding in concentration. They played another round of their ruleless game. He introduced her to his carved animals, night wolf, ember fox, sky lion. Not words spoken aloud. Words shaped in air. With every hour, the space between them grew easier, warmer. At dusk, the prince fell asleep against a pillow in the library alcove. Wooden animals scattered around him like tiny guardians. Maya tucked a blanket around him. She didn't know the king was there until she felt it. A shift in the air. A soft inhale behind her. She turned. King Elena Gilbert stood at the garden's edge, half shrouded in shadow. Her expression was unreadable, carved from centuries of distance. But her eyes were fixed on her sleeping son. And in them, for just a fragment of a heartbeat, Maya saw something she wasn't meant to witness. Pain. And longing so sharp it pierced like fangs. Before Maya could speak, the king's mask slipped back into place. "See to it he is comfortable," she murmured, voice soft as winter smoke. "Your quarters have been prepared adjacent to his." Then she was gone, a ghost with a crown. Later that night, Maya found her new room, a tiny but warm chamber with a narrow bed and a lantern glowing in the corner. She sat on the edge, exhaustion settling over her like snowfall. She had made the prince laugh. She had spoken the royal heir's language. She had caught the king watching with something like heartbreak in her eyes. And now she slept where nobles once lived. Maya curled beneath the blankets, the image of the prince's smile lingering behind her eyelids. For the first time in her life, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full of possibilities, full of fear, full of change so vast it trembled beneath her like an oncoming storm. She drifted to sleep knowing one truth. Duskmire Palace was no longer the same. And neither was she. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Halls. Maya woke to the hush of early light sliding under her shutters like a pale hand. For a moment she lay there listening, the house settling, servants stirring, the palace beginning to remember the day, and felt impossibly small and impossibly full at the same time. Last night's laughter lived behind her ribs, warm as an ember. The prince's soundless chuckle, the sudden bright shape of his smile, the way his hands had patted hers when she taught him, found all of it crowded her head like a secret that might burst. She dressed in the plain clothes the steward had left for her, smoothing the fabric with shaking fingers. The lantern sputtered. Beyond the glass, the east wing glowed blue with dawn. When she stepped into the corridor, she heard the soft clack of tutors' boots and the distant metallic ring of practiced swords. Duskmire woke slow as molasses, dignified as a beast that dusted itself before hunting. Her days settled quickly into routine. Mornings were for lessons. The prince took arithmetic and history with the tutor. He learned the old hand signs the court used for public proclamations, practiced the formal gestures that would one day be copied onto banners and decrees. Maya sat by his side at a low table, tracing digits with her fingertip as he signed sums into the air. Sometimes his signs wavered, hesitant, uncertain, but with her there they smoothed, like a path trodden by 2 feet instead of 1. Afternoons became their own private country. They read books in the library alcove, fingers following sentences while hands shaped questions and laughing responses. They made up games, silent scavenger hunts among the carved animals, races to make the silliest face without making a sound, contests to invent signs for things the books had no words for. The prince liked the dramatic ones: storm lion, a flourish of arm and curl of fingers; moonbread, a small, satisfied press of thumb against palm. Maya showed him the odd rituals she'd learned growing up, how to knot a rag into a doll, how to fold a towel so it could hide a secret. He watched her fingers like a hawk and tried to copy the twists and loops until his small brow furrowed in concentration. In the evenings they practiced etiquette. The tutor drilled the prince on posture, on the slow, formal signs that would one day echo through courts and councils. Maya watched, learning too the precise way to bow without seeming servile, the small adjustments of gaze that kept one safe in a room full of power. She learned which doors to leave closed and which windows to glance through. 1,000 small lessons, each one a thread in a garment she had never intended to wear. And all the while the palace whispered. There were pauses in doorways where servants exchanged sharp looks. There were sidelong glances from noble chambers when she passed with a stack of clean linens. The housekeeper's warnings became more frequent and softer, as if she were trying to comfort a child while teaching her to lie low. Outside the measured world of the East Wing, wheels turned. Councillor Vesper met with the High Council in a room thick with incense and older grudges. The council chamber's long table glinted with dark wood. Masks of ancestors stared down from the walls, their stone eyes accusing. Vesper was small, coiled like a spring, and he spoke with the calm cruel of someone who had practiced cruelty until it looked like reason. "A human girl raised to speak with hands," he said, hands folded like a book. By the king's will she will be placed near our heir. The court cannot tolerate such impropriety." Another noble murmured about precedent, lineage, the sanctity of the blood royal. A third suggested subtle remedies, tutors of greater renown, public exercises, to restore the prince to proper speech, perhaps a marriage negotiation, to bind his loyalties to a worthy house. A marriage? Vesper's smile was thin. Imagine a well-bred daughter, taught from birth, to speak aloud and carry the dynasty's lines. We must steer the prince to stability before his affections become mutable. Plans unfurled like cold banners. There would be formal instruction, louder tutors, more public duties staged where the prince would be disallowed private counsel. There would be whispers sown through the kitchens, rumors of weakness that would make noble houses avert their eyes and clutch their ledgers tighter. Vesper suggested gifts misdelivered, proclamations phrased, so the prince's silence appeared as choice rather than limitation. He proposed steady, deliberate pressure that would make the king's unusual favor feel like an experiment the court could not afford. They wrote their plans in the careful language of people who had never held a broom strategy disguised as concern, cruelty dressed in custom. Back in the East Wing, such calculations made themselves felt in the small ways that mattered. A tutor's colder nod, a guard's stricter inspection, a page lingering at the corridor's mouth with eyes that gleamed like coin. Maya began to notice the distances who stopped mid-step when she approached, who offered help with too wide a smile. She learned to move around the palace map like a ghost, visible only where the king's shadow allowed. One afternoon, the tutor escorted a visiting scribe through the alcove. They watched a lesson history of the Northern Treaty, dated hands signing the cramped scroll as they spoke of conquest and oath. The prince listened, eyes lost in the margins. When the tutor suggested a practice aloud speak the phrase, "Make the proclamation," the prince's hands tightened, but he refused. He put his fingers to his lips, a small, adamant barrier, and shook his head. Maya felt the tutor's frustration in the tilt of his jaw. He turned to her, palms open. "Will you show him?" he signed, voice low. "Will you help him say it?" She met his look and understood what he meant. To force him would be to break something essential. To let him choose was to risk the court's patience. Without a word, she moved closer to the prince, brushed the back of his hand with her fingertips, and signed the phrase slowly, rhythm like a lullaby. He mimicked, hesitant, the soundless syllables forming under their touch. When he managed it in his own way, a quiet cadence of palms and wrist, the tutor exhaled, a soft, reluctant relief passing over his face. He would record the progress tonight in his ledger and report it as improvement. Maya had defended him with hands more times than she'd cared to know. Once, when a visiting noble's child mocked him, showing off spoken tales, the prince's hands curled, shame and anger intersecting. Maya stepped between them, palms up, steady. Her gesture said what a sword could not. "Leave him. He is not broken." The noble's child hesitated, then laughed forcedly and went on. A small victory, but it mattered. The prince's shoulders dropped. He exhaled the way a person does when someone takes away the weight from their chest. The king's presence, meanwhile, threaded through these domestic battles like a quiet drumbeat. She did not speak often, and when she did it was measured and immense, but she watched. Her orders arrived in short notes. Her footsteps often felt more than seen, and once in a corridor lit by a single lantern, she stopped Maya for a single heartbeat. Maya nearly dropped the tray in surprise. The king removed a small embroidered handkerchief from her sleeve and held it out so that Maya could see the fine stitching. A tiny pattern of vines with a single silver thread worked through the center. No message, only the delicate item placed into her palm. "This belonged to my wife," the king said, in a voice that skimmed the surface of memory. "Keep it folded. It will remind you, perhaps, of what steadiness looks like." Maya wanted to say thank you, and instead found herself blinking until tears prickled. She folded the cloth carefully and hid it in the pocket of her apron. The gesture felt like a lighthouse in fog, unexpected and unaccountably kind. In the days that followed, she found herself touching the silver thread under her thumb whenever doubts crept in. But if the king's kindness offered warmth, it did not erase danger. Rumors hardened into edges. The court's patience thinned like ice. One night, as Maya prepared for sleep, she rolled back the covers to tuck in the prince's blanket and froze. There, folded and tucked deep in the hem of her bedroll, lay a small strip of paper. Her fingers found it with a treacherous calm. The ink was scrawled in a hurried hand. "Leave him. or you will bring ruin. No signature, no seal. Just the single, white threat, blunt as a blade. Her pulse kicked. Memories of the courtyard's wide eyes fluttered back Vesper's thin smile. The tutor's worried ledger, the pages that lingered at her doorway. The palace walls, once a place of routine and drudgery, now felt alive in a way that roared. She sat with the paper cooling under her thumb long after the lantern gutters had dimmed. The east wing slept around her, breathing shallowly, while beyond its walls the palace turned in its old, relentless rhythm. Maya felt the shift like a breeze before a storm. The caution in the house made sense now. The whispers were not idle superstition. They were the first signs of a pressure that would build and break. She folded the note into her fist and placed it beneath her pillow, as if hiding it would hide the danger too. She did not tell the steward. She did not tell her father. She kept the secret pressed to her chest and listened to the palace, as if she could hear the future when the house sighed. Outside her window, a single raven landed on the parapet and cocked its head, as if listening for news. Inside she breathed in, then out, and felt the promise and the peril in the same thin breath. They called it the restricted library for a reason. Shelves rose like silent sentinels on either side of the alcove, their spines stitched with dust and stories no one spoke of aloud. The oil lamps threw small islands of light. Beyond them, shadows gathered like old gossip. Maya and Prince Elena loved it for the secrecy. Here, the rules felt thinner. Here, the palace's expectations could be folded up and hidden behind page and binding. On that afternoon they had pulled a book from the very back one with a cracked leather cover and a ribbon the color of dried blood. It was a children's volume, banned not for scandal but for imagination. The annotated note in the margin, by the tutor's hand, scolded the author's liberties with monsters and magic. The palace preferred its monsters neat and its magic useful, not wild and glinting like a thing that belonged in a child's pocket. Maya opened it carefully. The pages smelled like dried flowers and moonlight. They read out loud with their hands. The prince's eyes lit at words about winged horses with silver manes and foxes that whispered riddles. They invented signs for each impossible creature. A flick of the wrist and a curl of fingers became the sky lion. A soft, cupped, palmed hush was the shadow moth. They acted them out among the carved animals, making the wooden dragons bow and the tiny wolves leap. The tutor, busy across the room, pretended not to watch, but Maya could see the corner of his mouth twitch now and then. They laughed without sound. The prince's laugh was wide and unguarded, the kind that pushed the sleep from his face and made his whole body softer. Maya traced a sign over the margin, and he copied it exactly, tiny fingers fumbling until the motion was perfect. The world narrowed to the two of them, and a book, and the private language they shaped between the lines. Then the doors slammed open. Boots thundered on the marble beyond the library's threshold. The lamps bucked in the gust of movement. Pages fluttered like startled birds. Counselor Vesper strode in with a retinue of guards. He was a small man, made menacing by how tightly he controlled his features, angular, efficient, his mouth a thin knife. He had the sort of face that suggested someone who had never forgiven a debt properly paid. "You!" he barked. The word split the air. "What is this?" The prince straightened, hands dropping to his lap. The carved animals froze mid-play. The tutor stood immediately, all practiced politeness folding into alarm. Vesper's eyes slitted toward Maya. He pointed with a trembling finger accusation, like a beacon. "This girl. She is not of noble blood. She speaks to the air in his private language. This is a breach of protocol, of safety." Maya's palms prickled. Her knees felt suddenly like soft clay. She could feel the chamber constrict books like walls, pages like tribunal witnesses. Servants outside the door whispered and shuffled. Vesper circled them as a predator might circle a stunned animal, gathering the court's outrage into words. "You endanger the boy's training," he said. "You undermine his tutors. You place the heir under improper influence." Maya stood up. She did not wait to be ordered. Her hands moved before thought, clear and steady. She signed, "He is learning. I only help." The motion was small, not a defiance but a fact. Vesper's nostrils flared. He folded his arms as if wrapping the prince in his own righteous cloak. "You presume," he spat, "to rewrite generations of rule by teaching him games and childish fancies? The boy must be made to speak. He must be fit to rule aloud. We will not have the line become an enigma." The tutor, who had been watching, perhaps hoping for exactly this disruption, stepped between them. His voice, when he spoke aloud, was measured but edged with a fatigue that had nothing to do with lesson plans. "Counselor," he said, "we are teaching him. He is progressing in his own way. The girl's presence has stirred him. He shows animation we have not seen. That cannot be dismissed as a threat without cruelty." Vesper turned on the tutor like a snapping hinge. "And you would accept this entertainment as instruction? The court demands children be prepared in the language of leadership, not hidden in pantomime." "Leadership is not only sound," the tutor retorted. He looked at the prince, then at Maya. "He learns. He answers to kindness. There is value in that." That last remark seemed to gather itself into a small, trembling current, and it moved the prince. He signed fast, words tripping with fear and urgency. "Don't take her, please, don't." The prince's hands shook. They were small and so sure when they crafted his plea. Maya felt the impulse to step closer, to shelter him in the way a child seeks shelter in a high storm. Vesper took it as proof of impropriety. "You will remove her," he announced, "for the safety of the crown and the clarity of succession." A murmur rose, the fluttering of whispered agreements. The guards shifted their weight as if already stepping forward. Something in Maya snapped, not loud, not heroic, but a keen and bright refusal. She planted her feet and met Vesper's gaze. Her hands moved, not with pleading, but with the simple truth she'd rehearsed in the quiet of the East Wing. "He is not broken." Her sign cut the room like a shard of glass. The silence that followed was immediate and profound. Vesper's face lost its composed mask. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the anger in him showed fully raw and animal. Then, like someone erasing a photograph, he smoothed his features into contempt. "You are bold," he said coldly. "Bold and insolent. A servant's child presumes to speak to royalty and to command adherence. You will come with us." At that, something happened that no one expected. King Elena Gilbert moved as if the air itself had chosen to carry her. She did not enter from the throne. She stepped from the library's shadow, not with the measured steps of ceremonial expectation, but with a speed that betrayed private curiosity. She stood between Vesper and the prince, as if a single bone could separate them. Her face was still. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, swept the assembly. For the first time, perhaps in many years, she did not seem like an immovable statue, but like a woman who had been listening for a long time, and had finally decided to speak with the kind of language that did not need to be loud. "Enough," she said softly. The word was a small thing, but it pressed through the tension like a hand on a wound. Vesper bristled, his argument collapsing into abrasions of embarrassed fury. "You presume," he began. The king raised a single finger, slowly, with the same deliberation she used when signing an edict. Then she did something no one in that library had ever seen her do. She knelt. The floor, for all its polish, was cool and unforgiving. The guards exchanged startled looks. Even the tutor's mouth parted. Maya felt her own breath stop in her throat. She did not kneel before Vesper. She knelt before the prince, before the small figure who had been taught the language of silence. The act was not theatrical. It was a private exchange made visible. The prince's hands rose in stunned confusion. He signed, "Mother?" The hesitation in the word was a fissure. King Elena's fingers trembled. Her first attempt was clumsy, the sign awkward under her knuckles. She made the motion for happy, the word she had seen the prince use only in the most private of moments, and it came out as a stammered, imperfect echo. It was not the practiced, formal sign of court usage. It was raw and human. The prince's face dissolved. He folded forward, as if a weight had been lifted. His shoulders slumped, and then he ran into his mother's arms with the surrender of someone who had carried silence as a boulder for too long. Maya watched as the two of them touched king and son, their crowns and histories unimportant at that small scale. The library's air changed. Vesper's plans, which had felt like iron scaffolding, rattled. For the first time, the king allowed a private need to be public, and that admission reshaped the room. Vesper's fury slumped into humiliation. He straightened, hairline pale with the exposure of being wrong. His partisans scurried, eyes lowered. He retreated with a clipped bow as if stepping from the stage when the actor's script had been unexpectedly rewritten. Afterwards, the king remained kneeling for a long time, fingers resting gently on the prince's shoulders. When she rose, she faced Maya directly. For a suspended moment, she did not look like a sovereign dispensing favors. She looked like a woman choosing a path. "You will stay," she said to Maya, voice as low as weather. Not as a novelty. As a companion. Maya's chest clenched. The word vibrated differently now. There was power in it. There was also an appeal, a request wrapped in command. Vesper left, tail tucked into plotting. He would not forget. Neither would his allies. The palace would not be undone in a day. But the library's small revolution lingered like sawdust in the air, subtle and impossible to ignore. That night, when the lamps were snuffed and shadows knitted themselves into the corners of the east wing, Maya pressed her hands flat against her cheeks and let the full tide of the day roll through her. The prince slept with a wooden dragon clutched to his chest. The tutor wrote long into the night in his ledger, no doubt to gild his report with the language of progress. Maya folded the king's handkerchief in her palm and felt the silver thread. It was a reminder now not only of kindness but of the fragile bravery that had broken the court's surface. Outside, the palace murmured. Inside, in the small hours, the library's dust settled on a different shape than before. Power had shifted, not replaced but nudged. A crack had formed in the ice, and beneath that crack, something colder and keener than policy had begun to thaw. The palace had a way of learning to breathe around a new fact. Where once the servants moved in single-file certainty, now there were pauses, hesitations like stones skipped across a pond. News traveled more in looks than in words. A cup passed with an extra bow. A guard held his post a few heartbeats longer than was necessary. Vesper's plans would not be shouted. They would be threaded into the days like a slow poison. He began where everyone did, with other people's fears. Counselor Vesper met in a room that smelled of lemon oil and old money. He gathered men and women whose faces had been carved into the palace walls in policy and pedigree. Maps were unrolled, ledgers opened, and names were whispered with the careful cruelty of people arranging a harvest. "We can't allow sentiment to guide succession," Vesper said, his voice cool and patient. "The prince must be seen as a pillar, not as a curiosity." He spoke of marriages, alliances, inked with the kind of dowries that tightened loyalties. He spoke of tutors of louder repute, orators who could make the whole court hear the boy in a single, booming phrase, drowning the private language in public triumph. He made a list of gentlemen-at-arms who would benefit from the rearrangement of guard posts. A few coins here, a promise there, gifts that kept the right mouths quiet, and pried open the right doors. "Bribe the night watch," he suggested. "Make sure a faltering prince has an audience ready for correction. Seed a rumor that the heir's silence is not temperament but frailty. Once the court sees weakness, they bend." A murmured assent circled the table like a viper curling. They would manufacture a story that fit old prejudices, humans too close to the throne, sentiment overriding duty, and the kitchens would pass the tale like stew. Hot, easy to swallow. Rumor is a patient animal. Within days, the air changed. In the laundry rows, the whispers hardened into statements. "The prince will be weaker for this." In the stables, a groom who favored a lord who'd been promised a title sighed that loyalty must be bought back. In the servants' hall, someone who'd once admired Maya's quick hands frowned instead, and crossed himself when her name was spoken, unseen repudiation like the closing of a door. It got into the castle's bones. Maya felt it in the small things. The steward's curt nod became a glance that lingered with calculation. A guard at the east wing door began to check her passes, with a meticulousness bordering on rudeness. The housekeeper's concerned whispers turned to warnings that made her fingers tremble when she folded blankets for the prince. Even the tutor, who had once dared to call her soft victories progress, began to ask pointed questions about training schedules and reports for the council. At night, when the candles guttered and the east wing sighed into sleep, doubts crept up like damp through stone. Maya had been a child in broom-swept corners for so long that sometimes the palace's grandeur felt like an elaborate costume she wore by mistake. She worried she would be found to be a mockery, a human girl plucked for spectacle or pity. What if she had misread the king's kindness? What if she was a tool to be displayed and discarded when the court grew bored? She carried those fears to her father the next day. He had not the palace's polish, but he had hands that remembered honest labor. When Maya found him in the scullery, he was hunched over a bucket, the water steaming around him like a private cloud. He looked up when she entered, soap suds on his knuckles and a softness in his eyes that never matched the hard lines of Duskmire. "You look tired," he said, not unkindly. Maya sat on the wooden bench beside him, folded her hands in her lap, and tried to braid her fears into something speaking. "They talk," she admitted finally. "In the halls. They say things." Her father rinsed a pan and set it on the rack. He didn't ask for names. He didn't need to. He knew the palace had ways of reminding people of their place. "You did good, Mango," he said, using the nickname he'd given her as a child. "You made him laugh. Not everyone can do that, not even folk with crowns." She let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. What if they're right? What if I'm only here because the king has pity, or because she wants a story to tell? What if when the story grows stale, they throw me out the same way they throw out frayed tapestries? Her father dried his hands on a rough towel and caught her gaze. He had always been a quiet man, the sort who taught without loud words. "Listen," he said softly. "You're not a tapestry. You're a person. You see a boy no one else bothers to see. That is not nothing. It will make people uncomfortable, yes. But uncomfortable people do strange things. Your job is to keep being you. The rest they can chew on as they please." He reached into his pocket and produced a small token, an old coin, nicked and worn from his palm. "If they try, show them this. Remind yourself where you come from." He pressed it into her hand with an earnestness that made her feel no less of the world for being small in it. Maya clutched the coin like a talisman. She kissed her father's rough hand and left with lighter steps, the weight of her fears not gone but named. Back at the East Wing, the prince had his own quiet reckonings. One evening, during a lesson designed to be suitably public, the tutor requested the prince stand and recite a pledge used for honoring visiting dignitaries spoken aloud, with gestures matching the words. The hall beyond the library was open. Servants and a few lower nobles were arranged to be witnesses. It was the kind of stage Vesper's allies had asked for, a rehearsal of normalcy. The prince rigidly went through the motions, but when the moment came to make the final, loud sign that the council had instructed an orator's flourish designed to clench the crowd's confidence, he simply stopped. His hands folded to his chest, fingers pressing there like a lock. He turned his eyes to Maya, small and steady in the alcove. He signed, "I don't want to be a tool." The words were the sort that fell like stones in quiet pools. Maya felt the echo of them in her own chest. "He doesn't want to be used," she signed back, slow and careful. "Nobody should use you. We will choose together." He watched her with a hunger she found unbearable and brave at once. For a long minute they held that exchange, two people who had been taught to measure themselves by what others expected and chose instead the timbre of their alliance. They decided on a small rebellion, not loud, not political. A private defiance meant only to be seen by those who mattered, the household children. They would plant a token for the harvest festival. A simple stitched banner left in the servants' hall. It would bear a sign, the one for friend that Maya had taught the prince, stitched in bright thread where any child might copy it without understanding the politics. It would be a small contagion of care, a domestic refusal of the court's cruel gossip. They practiced the stitch together, the prince's fingers awkward with needlework but earnest. Clumsy threads crossed and recrossed until the banner bore the crude but warm sign. They instructed a shy scullery boy to hide it among the linen for an hour. If children learned the sign in secret, then the court's carefully tended rumor would have to contend with something far more stubborn: affection. Not all rebellions are visible. Not all betrayals are absent-minded. A week later, a new page arrived. A bright-eyed youth with a silver braid and a grin practiced in flattery. He introduced himself as Thomas, and lingered near the prince with the closeness of someone hoping to please. He fetched towels, carried books, and held doors in a manner that suggested eagerness rather than duty. He watched Maya with a calculated attention that set her teeth on edge. He was, it turned out, very good at smiling. Only later, when a whispered question in the kitchen produced too quick a retort, and a manner that seemed rehearsed, did Maya's tutor corner the page. His face folded into a study of suspicion as he asked where Tomas had trained and whose orders he served. The page stammered, and then, under the tutor's patient scrutiny, confessed that he'd been recommended by a minor noble with ties to Vesper, the sort of man who traded favors like playing cards. The tutor told Maya with a shadowed look. "He is not friend," he said quietly. "Keep your hands where he can see them." Maya nodded, though her stomach knotted. The palace, which had seemed possible to navigate by honesty and small kindness, had developed an underside of watchfulness. Someone was watching the watcher. Then came the day the rumor threatened to bite. A cart arrived at the city gate, late in the afternoon, bearing goods from a northern merchant. In the scribbled manifests were several packages, letters intended for the palace. As the gate guards inspected the cargo, one of the packages was found oozing a dark stain that smelled faintly of iron, Men coughed and stepped back. One of the letters, when opened, bore a smear that looked suspiciously like blood. It was, the captain said, a taunt or a threat. The messenger swore he had no idea where the stain came from, but the seed was planted. Papers were sealed tighter. The gate's locks clanged heavy. Vesper's rumors had acquired teeth. Maya stood in the courtyard as the commotion unfurled. She tasted iron on her tongue and felt the palace's easy confidence curdle into concern. The game had moved past whispers into action. If Vesper would not be satisfied with rumor, then he might embrace something far worse. Her hands found the coin her father had given her and closed around it until the metal warmed. She had wanted small rebellions, a banner stitched in secret, and a child taught to sign. Now the palace itself felt like a chessboard with someone ready to move without caring which pieces broke. The raven that had perched on the parapet before repeated its caw, an impatient punctuation in the cool afternoon air. Maya folded her fingers into a vow she could not yet shape into speech. For the prince, for her father, for the banner hidden among the linens, she would learn to be more than a frightened girl with clean towels. Storms, she had learned, began with small clouds. The palace had learned to walk on eggshells. By morning, it learned how to crack them. The ceremony was meant to be small, an afternoon presentation in the eastern courtyard, where nobles could observe the prince's progress. Torches were lit though it was day, their flames dancing like witnesses. Maya stood behind Prince Elena with the tutor, hands clasped tightly to keep her nerves from spilling out. The prince wore soft blue. His hair had been combed back so severely it made his eyes enormous, almost fragile. Maya signed encouragement to him, small shapes hidden behind her sleeve. He breathed easier. That was when the page Tomas moved. It was light, casual, a nudge disguised as clumsiness. But he timed it perfectly. Right as the prince stepped onto the dais, his foot slipped on a bead of oil someone had dripped across the step. Maya saw the glint of it only as the prince gasped silently and pitched forward. She lunged. Her hands found his shoulders just before his head could strike the marble. A noble's shriek cut the air. The tutor stumbled backward. Guards rushed. The prince trembled in her grip, breathless with swallowed fear. An accident, Tomas cried too loudly. I saw nothing. Someone must have, indeed. Vesper stepped forward from the crowd, expression set like a blade. This, he announced, is precisely why the heir must not be coddled by untrained hands. Whispers curdled instantly. This human girl, she is distracting him. A danger. Maya tightened her hold on the prince. He turned into her like a child hiding from thunder, his hands trembling against her sleeve. The king arrived with the cold speed of a storm. Elena Gilbert stepped onto the dais, crimson cloak slicing through the panic with terrible poise. Her presence pressed silence into every rib of the courtyard. What happened? She asked. Before Maya could answer, Vesper bowed with venomous humility. Your Majesty, the boy stumbled. The girl caught him, but the question is why he stumbled at all. Perhaps the heir needs trained, loyal attendants, not sentimental attachments. A murmur rippled outward. Barbed agreement. Prince Elena clutched at Maya's hand. His signing trembled against her wrist. Don't let them take you. Please, don't let them. The king's eyes flickered. Not at Maya, at the prince. Something inside her wavered. Guards, she said softly. Remove the girl from the courtyard. Maya felt the world tilt. The prince's breath left him in a silent cry. 2 guards stepped forward, hesitant but compelled by the king's order. Maya was pulled gently but firmly away. The prince reached for her, fingers forming broken shapes. Stay, don't go, don't. She wasn't allowed to answer. Not in public. The king turned away, face unreadable. Vesper hid satisfaction behind civility, and the nobles dissolved into murmurs that tasted like ashes. They took her not to the dungeon, but to a shadowed antechamber near the king's private hall. The guards shut the door behind her. For a long moment Maya stood alone, breathing hard, listening to her pulse as though it were counting down the seconds of her fate. Then the king entered. There were no guards, no counselors, no audience. Just a mother, a ruler, a woman leaning heavily on the back of a chair as though centuries pressed against her spine. You caught him, she said, voice low. If you hadn't... Maya swallowed. It wasn't an accident, Your Majesty. Of course it wasn't. The king's eyes were dark pools deep, tired. Vesper is accelerating his schemes. He wants a spectacle. He wants the boy to appear fragile so he can claim authority. Maya hesitated, then signed, small and careful. He is not fragile. The king inhaled sharply. Not in offense. In recognition? Slowly, painfully slowly, she lifted her own hands. And she signed back. Clumsy. Stilted. But intentional. I know. Maya's breath caught. The king looked almost ashamed as she lowered her hands to her sides. I have been learning in private, she said, watching the two of you, practicing with his tutors when he sleeps. But I am slow. I am not gifted in gentleness. You're trying, Maya whispered. A bitter breath escaped the king, half laugh, half wound. Trying isn't enough for a ruler. But for a mother. She closed her eyes briefly. I cannot protect him alone. Vesper is rallying factions. The nobles want a prince who speaks their way, bows their way, exists their way. And they blame me. Yes, the king said. They will continue to, and if removing you buys me time. She stopped, looked away. Then I must appear to consider it. Maya's voice cracked. What will happen to him without? I haven't decided his future, the king interrupted. But I have decided yours. You are not dismissed. You are not banned. You will remain under guard while I fight. Maya saw it, then beneath the armor of authority, the ragged terror of a parent gripping control by fraying threads. I will not let them take him, the king whispered. But I must act carefully. No misstep, no weakness they can use. Her voice trembled on that last word. Weakness. Maya bowed her head. I'll stay, she said. If it helps him, if it helps you. The king nodded once, sharply. You will see him again soon. For now, let me mislead them. Night fell like a dropped curtain. Guards escorted Maya through dim corridors toward a holding room, not a prison, but not freedom either. Halfway there, a shape darted from behind a column. Prince Elena. 2 guards tried to block him, but the prince pushed past with surprising ferocity, small hands flying in frantic gestures. Don't go, don't go, don't go, don't. Maya knelt instantly. I'll come back, she whispered, shaping the promise in her hands. I swear it. His breathing hitched. Tears streaked silently down his cheeks, quick, hot, panicked. She wiped them with her thumb. I will return. She repeated it slowly, deliberately, until he stopped shaking. A guard cleared his throat apologetically. We must. I know, Maya whispered. She let them pull her away. The prince stayed rooted to the stone, hands trembling, watching until the last sliver of her disappeared around the corner. That night the palace screamed. Not literally, but in the language of chaos. Shouting. Boots. Steel against stone. Maya jolted awake as a guard burst into the holding room. Blood streaked across his collar. There's been an attack, he gasped. A splinter faction armed, inside the palace Vesper's doing, or someone worse. The walls shook. Outside someone yelled for reinforcements. Another shouted, Protect the air! Maya's heart stuttered. The coup had begun, and she was locked away from the prince. They burst the night like a wound. Maya felt the palace shaking in ways she had never felt before. Doors thrown, alarm bells that bit the air, the metallic tang of worry and blood beneath the torchlight. Guards ran like startled animals. Men shouted names. Somewhere a window shattered, and a vase tumbled into 1,000 dry white stars. She had been locked away when it began. She found herself freed by noon, as if the palace had hurriedly decided she was useful after all. A steward with bruised sleeves thrust a cloak at her and nodded toward the great stair. The king summons you, he said, all present. Present, useful, words bent to new meanings. Maya wrapped the cloak around her shoulders and climbed, boots echoing on steps that still bore the track of soldiers. The courtyard was a smear of faces. Nobles clustered like dark moths. Commoners pressed at the gates. Flags hung limp. The air outside the palace tasted like iron and ash. At the center of everything, high above the pressing crowd, King Elena Gilbert stood on the balcony, a red slash against the pale sky. Her voice when it came was not the soft private sound Maya had heard that night in the library. It was carved to carry. People of Duskmire, she called, and the crowd hushed as if they were all inhaling. Come forward. They pressed closer. Children scrambled up walls and onto shoulders. Women shoved forward, shawls slipping, eyes bright. The city had come, curious and hungry and ready to be told what to fear. Nobles murmured behind jeweled fingers. They traded glances like ledgers that had been balanced by rumor. "What will she do?" one asked. "Will she dismiss the girl? Will she name a regent? Will the heir be deemed unfit?" No one expected what she did next. The king raised her hands. Hands that had signed happy in a library the other night. Hands that had once terrified the room merely by resting at her sides. "My son will speak," she said. "He will speak in his own way. He will stand before you." A ripple of disbelief. A flare of anger. Vesper's eyes, cold and hard, scanned the crowd like a man measuring stones. He mouthed something to a cohort. Men shifted as if preparing to interfere. But the king did not wait for them. Prince Elena stepped into the balcony's silver frame. He was smaller in daylight. His hair was a pale banner. He looked out at the city, at the rooftops that curled like old scrollwork, at the faces that crowded so close you could almost count their breaths. He turned toward the king, then toward Maya, a brief, bright look that held both fear and a fierce, animal gladness that she clung to. She stood by his side, hands unclenched but ready. He raised his hands. Maya's chest stuttered. This was the moment they had whispered about in the East Wing after laughter and lessons. The secret seed they had watered in the dark. She had signed to him in barns and broom closets, never like this. She saw his first signs. They were slow, careful, the way someone might speak into a storm and hope to be heard. He formed the word I, a simple point, honest as a child's. Then he signed will, a push of the palm outward, steady as a promise. Then he signed serve, a gesture that opened like a hand offering itself. Maya translated aloud, her voice steady though it wobbled at the edges. "I will serve the people of Duskmire," she said, shaping his meaning into words. Each sentence she gave turned the prince's hands into a voice the crowd could hold. "I will protect the weak. I will learn from you. I will stand for justice." At first, confusion ran like a low current through the crowd. Faces around her squinted. Lips moved. Then a small child in the front, barefoot, cheeks smudged with coal, lifted his hands and tried to copy the prince's slow motion. His fingers fumbled. His mother nudged him, embarrassed. But another child on a balcony above mimicked him, then a baker's boy across the square. They made the signs haltingly, gracelessly, but they made them. It spread. Tentative palms rose like shoots, a dozen hands, then 100. An uneasy silence broke into something that felt like a wave. Arms signing hello, thank you, we hear you. The palace guards blinked, and then flinched. Nobles bowed and then found their fingers miming the prince's words without meaning to. It was messy and imperfect and utterly contagious. Maya's voice shook only once, when he signed the last phrase, not silent, not unseen. She gave it to the crowd, and a hush followed, not of fear but of attention. Somewhere behind her, the tutor exhaled, a sound like wind through old pages. The king watched, and for a sliver of a moment her face was not the map of a monarch, but the map of a mother who had found a son speaking back to her. Her hand moved to the prince's shoulder and lingered, an emblem of acceptance that chewed through the palace's skepticism. Cheers rose, not the violent applause of the court, but a slow, widening sound that felt like water filling a basin. People signed back in, awkward, earnest waves. The city learned to make a language it had never been taught in an afternoon. But beneath the light was shadow. Vesper did not melt into acceptance. He retreated into planning, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into plans like a trap. He had lost a public battle, but his hunger for control had only sharpened. The coup had shown him weakness. He could weaponize roads where rumor could travel, guards who could be bribed, fear that could be fanned into a fire. When the crowd dispersed, discussing and signing and clutching one another in the wide plaza, Maya felt the thrill like a burning in her chest. They had won a day. They had not won the court. She looked up at the king, whose profile cut the sky like a blade. The monarch's decree would echo through the city for days. Tutors would be summoned, laws rephrased, hands taught in the market squares. Doors would open, and some doors would close harder than before. Vesper's plotting had been delayed but not ended. He would bide. He would take smaller steps that added up to ruin if no one stopped him. Maya folded the prince's last sign into herself and kept it like a stone in her pocket. Her hands trembled, but not with the fear that had owned her for so long. This tremor felt like a promise. Outside the palace, the city signed back, awkward and brave. Within the palace, shadows stirred, patient as foxes. The tide had turned, but the shoreline was not yet safe. The celebrations had barely cooled when the palace began to tremble again. Not with cheering. With boots. Maya felt at first a vibration through the stones beneath her feet, a shift in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She had been returning the prince to his chambers, her fingers still tingling from signing the prince's speech again and again as he replayed each moment with pride. Then shouts. Metal. A crash like bones breaking. The hallway shuddered as a guard sprinted past, armor askew. The west gate under attack. Get the air inside. Move. Maya grabbed the prince's hand before he could even turn toward the noise. His eyes widened, reflective as moonlit water, and for a heartbeat she saw pure, unfiltered fear. What's happening? He signed, hands trembling. She squeezed his palms. Stay with me. But the palace was unraveling. The feast hall below erupted with screams, doors slammed, a rumble of bodies surged like a tide as guards shoved nobles toward the exits. The red banners along the walls fluttered violently in a wind that had no business being indoors. Then came Vesper's voice cold, amplified by some device his followers held aloft. Tonight we reclaim the throne from corruption. Maya froze. The prince stiffened. We restore our ancient ways, Vesper declared. Seize the air, contain the king, remove the girl. That last command hit like a punch. 2 guards turned the corner, one loyal, one not. Maya recognized the traitor instantly. His insignia had been scratched off, leaving the metal raw. He lunged for the prince. The loyal guard blocked him with a snarl. Steel clashed. Sparks spat across the corridor. Maya shoved the prince behind her as the guard yelled, "Take him now. Back route, go." She didn't argue. She grabbed the prince's wrist and ran. They tore through twisting hallways lit by torches that flickered as if they, too, feared being snuffed out. Maya signed directions mid-sprint: duck, left. Hide, and the prince followed her every motion. Their footsteps slapped the stone, sharp and desperate. Behind them, shouts drew near. Vesper's rebels fanned out like wolves. They reached the servants' stair, narrow, familiar, smelling of old bread and mop water. Maya almost cried with relief. This was her territory. She knew every crack. Here, she whispered. We go down to the lower kitchens, then through the laundry yard and... The prince tugged her sleeve sharply. A rebel guard waited below, spear angled upward. Maya yanked the prince back just as the spear tip scraped the stone where his head would have been. She could hear her heartbeat crackle like fire. They couldn't go down. She scanned the hall. There, an old laundry chute. Too small for most adults. Perfect for... She pointed to it. Inside. The prince stared. You're joking. Now, she signed sharply. He hesitated one fraction too long but obeyed. She helped him slip inside the chute and lowered him gently, praying it led somewhere safe. The moment he disappeared, 3 rebels rounded the bend. There! One shouted. Maya slammed the chute door closed and ran. She didn't get far. A hand grabbed her braid, yanking her backward. She cried out. A rebel twisted her arm, forcing her to the floor. Where's the prince? He hissed. Maya spat at him. Not with you. He raised a blade. Before he could strike, the wall exploded. Or rather, the king crashed through the door beside them, sword drawn, cloak shredded, eyes burning with something beyond fury. The rebel didn't even manage a scream before she struck him down. Maya, she barked. Where is he? Maya panted. Laundry chute east shaft, he's headed to the... Good. The king hauled her to her feet. Stay behind me. The hallway filled with rebels. Vesper stepped among them like a priest, leading a procession. Your Majesty, he said, bowing mockingly. Step aside. You've ruled long enough. The king's voice was a blade, sharp and unceremonious. You betrayed my house, my people, my son. Your son, Vesper sneered, is unfit. The kingdom needs a leader who commands, not one who whimpers behind hands and interpreters. Maya felt rage rise inside her like boiling water. The king lifted her sword. He is my heir, and he is more than you will ever be. Vesper nodded to his men. Take her. They charged. What followed blurred steel, dust, the flash of ruby on the king's crown. Maya ducked behind a pillar, heart in her throat, signing silently in the dark. Please be safe. She didn't even know if the prince could see her. She hoped he could feel it somehow. Then a scream. High, thin, familiar. The prince. Maya ran without thinking, following the sound to the laundry yard. Rebels had found him. 2 men cornered him against a cart, reaching. "No!" Maya hurled herself forward, grabbing a fallen broomstick and swinging with every scrap of strength. The first rebel cracked across the jaw. The second staggered as she jammed the stick into his ribs. The prince launched at her, wrapping his arms around her waist, sobbing silently. "I'm here," she signed frantically. "I'm here. I'm here." More rebels stormed in. Maya pulled the prince behind her again, ready to die standing. But the courtyard gates burst open. Not soldiers. The people. Citizens from the plaza, the same ones who had signed to the prince hours earlier, flooded into the yard. Bakers wielded rolling pins. Miners swung pickaxes. Children hurled rocks. They overwhelmed Vesper's rebels not with training, but with fury. "The heir stands with us," someone shouted. "Protect the prince." For Duskmire, it was chaos, but it was salvation. Vesper saw the tide turning. He tried to flee only to find the king herself waiting at the far gate. She slammed him to the ground with one ruthless strike. It was over. Rebels were cuffed, gates barred, torches relit. Prince Elena clung to Maya like she was the last solid thing in a world made of smoke. His hands shook as he signed. "I thought I lost you." "You won't," she whispered. "Not while I'm breathing." Dawn arrived, thin and bruised. The yard was a battlefield of footprints and shattered crates. Blood darkened the cobblestones, but the air tasted of something new, something cleared, something possible. Vesper was dragged past in chains, spitting oaths. The king stopped beside Maya. For once, she didn't look like stone. "You saved my son," she said quietly. "You saved this kingdom." Maya shook her head. "We saved each other." The king's gaze dropped not in weakness, but in gratitude heavy enough to bow a mountain. The palace would heal, but its scars would not fade quickly. Neither would the memory of the night when silence rose up and answered back. The sun rose over Duskmire like a tired blessing, glinting off broken tiles and trampled banners, catching on the wet stones where blood had dried in thin, rust-red arcs. Yet somehow, impossibly, morning felt gentler than it had in weeks. Word traveled faster than birds once the gates reopened. The coup has failed. The prince is safe. The king will speak. Servants whispered as they scrubbed the hall, laughter tucked in the corners of their tired faces. Guards straightened their uniforms. Nobles emerged from hiding with embarrassed dignity. Even the ravens seemed calmer, perched on the ramparts with heads tilted like curious witnesses. By afternoon, the king stood on the balcony once more. But the world below her had changed. Crowds surged in the square families, merchants, miners, children, elders. Some still bore bruises from the night before. Some carried bread to share. Some held each other as though the earth itself had almost vanished under their feet. Maya stood beside Prince Elena, her palms damp but steady. The prince stayed close, brushing her sleeve in a silent reassurance. The king raised her hands. Not for battle, not for sentencing, for law. "My people," she said. "We lived through a night of shadows. Today we choose light." Her voice carried, resonant and unbroken. "From this day forward, the palace will teach sign language to every court member, every guard, every household servant, every noble child." The crowd reacted in a gasp, surprised, hopeful. "Our heirs," she continued, "will never again be forced to speak in only one voice. Every way of speaking will be honored." Maya saw eyes glisten. The prince stood taller. The king motioned for him to step forward. He did slow, small steps, but sure. When he reached the balcony rail, sunlight caught his pale hair, and he seemed almost crowned in gold. He lifted his hands, and Maya translated not because he needed her to speak for him, but because she wanted to lend her voice to his. "I am your prince," she said aloud, mirroring his motions. "I will learn from you, as you learn from me. We will build something new together." Then something unexpected happened. The king, Elena Gilbert, the ruler carved from storms and stone, lifted her hands and signed beside him. Slowly, hesitantly. Her fingers stumbled on a few shapes, but she didn't stop. The prince looked up at her, astonished. Maya felt her throat tighten. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, the flutter of hand signs. Children waved both arms like birds taking flight. The king placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, not heavy, not commanding. Grateful. "Stand with us," she whispered. And for the first time, Maya stood before the kingdom not as a servant, not as a janitor's kid, not as a temporary companion, but as someone seen. That night, the library glowed with warm lantern light. Their silhouettes flickered across the bookshelves like gentle ghosts moving between stories. Prince Elena curled against his father's cloak on a cushioned bench, sleepy from the ceremony. He tapped the king's sleeve once, twice. "Story?" he signed. The king blinked, startled. "It has been a long time," she murmured. I do not remember the old tales well." The prince leaned back, expectant. Patient in the way that only children who have suffered understand patience. The king inhaled and lifted her hands. Slowly, she formed her first sign, then the next. Then an entire sentence halting, misshapen, but touching the heart of a lullaby. Maya stood in the doorway, watching the king sign a story about a wandering star, and a child who followed it through forests and frost, never speaking, but always heard. Her voice caught halfway through, but the prince helped her, guiding one hand with his smaller one. When they finished, he leaned into her side. She rested her cheek against his hair. Maya slipped away quietly, letting the moment belong to them alone. Later, she found her father in the lower courtyard, repairing a lantern bracket knocked loose in the chaos. His hands, rough with years of scrubbing stone, trembled when he saw her approach. "Maya," he whispered, "are you hurt?" She shook her head, smiling as she hugged him. "Not hurt, just changed." He stepped back, studying her face like he was reading a secret carved there. "I always knew you weren't meant for broom closets." His voice cracked on the last word. She held his calloused hand, guiding him toward the palace garden, the one she used to clean from the outside. Now she walked inside it freely, pointing out the pond where the prince had laughed, the alcove where they invented signs, the window where dawn always seemed to look kinder. Her father blinked at the cherry blossoms, blooming despite the season. "You belong here more than I ever did." "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe not forever." He smiled, tired and proud. "Wherever you go, I'll be behind you." That evening, the entire city gathered in the plaza for a final act. Lanterns, hundreds of them, were lit and lifted into the dusk. Floating beads of fire drifted upward, carrying written blessings, thank yous, names of loved ones lost or found. Maya stood between the prince and the king as they released theirs together. The lantern rose, catching on a warm breeze, drifting toward the horizon. Below, the people signed to them awkward but earnest gestures, flickering like a new language being born. Maya touched her heart. The prince did the same. The king followed. For a moment, the whole kingdom seemed to breathe as one. And as the lanterns rose higher, the truth she had carried since that rainy courtyard day whispered across her mind. Sometimes it takes the quietest child to teach a kingdom how to speak. If you enjoyed the story, do check out the next story, because we have prepared a collection of stories that you will find even much more interesting than the one you just watched. Click on the video showing on your screen right now to enjoy. Thank you.